My name is Liz Reitzig, and I'm mom to 5 amazing children. And we depend on farmers to provide us with the raw milk that we all drink. The Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, they protect our farmers by helping to keep them out of jail. In this hostile climate towards raw milk, many farmers are criminalized merely for feeding their communities and providing them the foods they need. This is why I support the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, because they are there, they have our farmers' backs, they keep the supply chain open for the families like mine who need this. And that's why I'm asking you to support them today as well.
Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to bipcot.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network on theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. So, Peaceful Anarchism is covered by the BIPCOT No Gov license. This allows for use for anybody except for governments and the agents thereof. You can find out more about that at bipcot.org. So today we have John Moody, who is an activist for food freedom. He's the executive director for the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, and he's a small farmer in Kentucky. And we're going to be discussing his, his organization. The website is called farmtoconsumer.org, and you can find him on Facebook under John Moody, Moody, as well as the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund as a Facebook page and YouTube channel and Twitter. So check them out. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of food regulation and food freedom, as well as, he mentioned when the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund just started, how it worked a lot on helping to reduce farmer raids by fascist agents of the state, usually the FDA or maybe USDA or other types of alphabet soup agencies like that, and also maybe the history of the Wholesome Meat Act and how that has changed the meat industry to date. So John, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I heard you first on the Tom Woods show, and I thought that was a really awesome conversation. I'm like, God damn it, I got to get this guy on my show.
Oh, thank you.
No problem. So please, let us know a little bit about, I guess, the background of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, and then go into how food. I remember you mentioned to me how you said food. In general, I guess dairy and meat and all these other various areas are some of the most regulated in all of our society. And so explain that to people a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think most people don't realize people complain about light bulb laws and people complain about e-cigarette laws or this or that. And then they go, get food at a drive-through, or they go to a grocery store, and they're like, oh, but I have all this freedom and choice in what I eat, which is totally not true. More than our homes, more than our cars, more than our education, I'd submit to people the most regulated and meddled with part of our lives is the food we eat and who we get it from. And it's amazing when you begin to see how bad that's been for everybody involved in the system, except for, a few well-placed people who make a lot of money through this. And especially, though, how bad it is for average farmers and how bad it is for eaters. The people who get to enjoy all of these pseudo foods that no longer have nutritional value and the other problems they contain.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I remember you telling me that I think it was Jeffrey Tucker who was talking about McDonald's food and how this is the wondrous treasure of capitalism, and not really taking into account how subsidized fast food industries like McDonald's are. And it's kind of irritating to me, like, to consider, like, how would food actually look like if it did not have the perverse incentives imposed on it by the state, right? How would it have developed? We have no idea. Like so many areas in society, we have no idea how cars would have developed with all these regulations. Without food, how would food have developed?
Yeah. Well, I think the sad part is we have little glimpses of what food would have been like, and it would have been amazing. We would get Tucker's gastric delights, these marvelously, like, I have an apple orchard a couple hours north of us that supplies apples to our buying club. They have 30 varieties of apples.
Wow.
Well, growing up, I thought there was one. Like, the red delicious. I don't know why it's called delicious. It's more like the red douchebag. And like they have an apple that is a rust brown color that is like, it's called a golden russet apple. It almost looks like a potato that grows on a tree.
Wow.
And it's like, how do we get, like, have you ever seen rainbow carrots? Or like, have you ever seen purple potatoes? So like, we have a foretaste of what a free market food system would look like, but it's constantly suppressed and hampered and hindered at every turn and in every way by the government, by the government cartels that are acting at the behalf of the food behemoth, bad guys.
So if you were to tell that to somebody and they would say, okay, so it's controlled and it's suppressed all these different varieties, but why? What's the motive? Like, how does that benefit, the corporations to have only a couple of varieties of apples and a couple of varieties of corn, let's say?
Well, for corporations, there's a really good book your readers can grab called Stuffed and Starved by a guy by the name of Ra Patel. And if I were to put an hourglass shape up here, the top would represent people who produce food, farmers. There's millions of them at the top of the hourglass. At the bottom of the hourglass, there's eaters. There's hundreds of millions of us. But what happens at the center of that hourglass?
Bottleneck.
There's a bottleneck. And farmers in all sorts of areas and all sorts of industries, they cannot get food to consumers without going through the corporate control matrix at the center of the bottleneck that's established by regulation and other factors. So, and those food processors, food distributors, who are a tiny fraction of the total number of people involved in food, exert enormous control over what is raised, how it's raised. And one thing I think most people don't realize, farmers are one of the few industries that has no ability to set what they get paid for their products. So imagine, if you're a beef farmer, you don't get to decide what you get paid for your beef. If you're a dairy farmer, you don't get to decide what you're paid for your dairy products. If you're an apple orchard farmer, you don't get to decide what you get paid per bushel of apples. You are left with no choice but to take whatever is offered you, no matter how grossly unfair. To expose myself to this experience, We have a 35-acre farm, and we've raised out some beef cattle over the past few years. I decided to take just a couple of them to the local auction. So the beef auction. So the majority of beef eaten in America, that it starts out on farms like mine, but the cows at some age will go to the auction house and they'll be auctioned to larger beef companies who will then transport the beef, like they go into the commodity beef chain. And I wanted to experience what it was like for my neighbors who I've been getting to know for many years, and I see their economic turmoil, and I hear their complaints, but I really wanted to understand. And you go to this auction house, and there's one person buying beef and bidding on them. There's no market. There's no competition.
Wow.
Yeah. And there used to be two, but the one guy quit showing up because he said, we're both on the same page anyway. It's just for show that I'm here. So you take this one, I'll take the one down the road. And that's what farmers face. That's why pasteurized, cruelty-based CAFO milk can go on sale for $1.99 a gallon at Kroger or Walmart or somewhere. Because that farmer, you are literally breaking his family when you buy that milk. The average dairy farmer loses money with every gallon they milk. This year, grain commodity prices are so low that farmers will be planting grain that they know they're going to lose money on. Therefore, get this. This is great. There's a great article recently on this in the mainstream news. Therefore, a lot of them are planting extra. So imagine being in an industry where you know you're going to lose money doing something. So you decide to do more of that to increase your loss because the government is going to step in and bail them out.
Wow.
Because of the Farm Bill.
So this is, I assume you're talking about the big factory farms.
Well, these are grain and commodity farmers.
Okay.
But these artificially low grain prices, which happen because the government has, totally corrupted and perversified grain growing in our nation. Who benefits from artificially cheap grain? Well, I don't.
Yeah.
But people who are confinement raising animals benefit, gads. Why is a chicken? Why can you buy a whole chicken on sale at a grocery store for 99 cents a pound when I cannot raise a whole chicken for you on my farm for probably less than $3 to $4 a pound?
Right. Yeah.
What's driving that disparity?
Yeah.
It's because my competition is so heavily subsidized and protected and propped up.
Yeah, it reminds me of I think when FDR came to power during the Great Depression after the crash of 29, and one of the policies he instituted, I forget the name of it, but they basically sent agents to slaughter massive amounts of pigs and dump milk, and I forget what the act was called, but that was in an effort to somehow manipulate the prices of these goods, and in a time when there's mass starvation, and so I think since then they started paying farmers not to grow certain things, and I assume that's still around today.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
In a number of states, farmers are not allowed to choose how much they grow. So take raisins. The Supreme Court finally sided with raisin growers. And basically, in California and other states, this raisin board told you how much you could grow raisin-wise. And if you grew over it, they could seize your raisins and throw them away.
Really?
And this is true. Like there's these quotas and regulatory systems in place, many of them that date back to World War II and other absolutely egregious things that took place during that period of time in terms of freedom, free association, private property, that are still not only on the books but being used to basically tell farmers, you can grow this and not that. You can grow this much, not that much. And if you go over, we'll just take it and throw it away so it doesn't enter the market.
Oh. It just hurts my heart when I hear things like that. Like, man, this is a government that everybody supports and loves and thinks protects them and provides security and roads, and it's destroying
roads with large potholes that give me flat tires.
Right. And it does. Yeah, it's like in so many facets of life, we can demonstrate that the state is an agency of inefficiency and wastefulness, complete rampant wastefulness, not only destroying productivity and destroying creativity and potential, but just completely wasteful and just like you said, destroy. and we were talking earlier about the raids with the raw dairy farmers and how I've seen videos. Oh my God, it's so painful. These people, they go over there and they say, "Where's your milk? Where's your cheese?" And they just force them gallons and gallons of milk. They just force them to just dump it. Oh, and then the people who work on the farms, they're trying to talk to these people like, how can you sleep at night? How can you live with yourself doing this kind of job?
Well, there's two stories your listeners would probably appreciate. One is the story of Vernon Hershberger. He was a farm-to-consumer member in the state of Wisconsin, and the state of Wisconsin has basically like a moo-mafia. So it's like a dairy cartel, the moo-mafia.
I just got that.
And so the moo-mafia, Vernon started a private buying club where he was just peacefully, voluntarily feeding his community. Total transparency. Nobody's forced to shop there, and he was just peacefully feeding his community, people who wanted food directly from his farm. And the DACTAP, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection in Wisconsin, this is a guy who has 10 children and not as much as a parking ticket. And he was drug into a multi-year, multi-million-dollar court battle that we ended up litigating. At one point, an agent of the DACTAP in Wisconsin showed up at his farm and poured dye in his, I think it's 1,000-gallon bulk milk tank.
Oh my God.
Destroying 1,000 gallons of pristine organic milk.
Wow.
In a state that has tens of thousands of starving people.
Right.
We ended up winning that case, even though the judge in the state played every dirty trick you could possibly imagine in the courtroom. We won the case, and at some point after the case, the same woman who had poured the dye in Vernon's bulk tank, she came up to Vernon crying. And Vernon has been one of the most gentle-hearted, forgiving people you will ever meet, especially after what the state had done to him. And this woman walks up to him crying, saying what I did was so wrong. So some of them, it's just to encourage people. I'm very open in my views. You have no right to tell me what I eat and feed my family. Right. And if you destroy my food, what you are doing is a great moral evil. But if we continue to treat these people with compassion and love as we are driving home the evil and wickedness of what they're doing, we can win some of them back. and really begin to break down some of the opposition there in a way that you'll never do if you respond to their dirty tactics in kind.
Right.
So there's the Vernon Hershberger case, which illustrates large amounts of food being just needlessly, wantonly destroyed for no reason. But then another one that comes to mind is Laura Bloodsoe. If you Google farm to fork fiasco, it'll bring up the story on our website. But Laura and her family are organic farmers in Nevada, and they were doing a farm to fork dinner on their farm. So just a beautiful, all stuff from their farm dinner. I think it was in the fall, so just beautiful weather. 5-star chef came, and a local health department official showed up and forced them to pour bleach on all of the food. The health official would not even let them feed the food to their pigs and other animals. And it's appalling. It's one of the reasons I am so for eliminating immunity and impunity for government officials. Because the problem is right now a government official does wrong, and there's generally little to no consequence, and if there is, it's borne by the taxpayer.
Sure, yeah.
So and I'm just like, that's not that's just not acceptable that these people can be in positions to do such harm to other people and have no repercussions or ramifications for themselves.
Yeah. You're so right when you say that even if you do enter into a legal battle with them and you win and you get paid, that money is taxpayer money. So it's like it's not even their money. So it's there's really no way to win. And the way you say, eliminating this immunity, this sovereign immunity, to me is what separates a private business from the state. Right? Because every private business has to claim responsibility and accountability for their product, right? You can't just say, I'm just doing my job. You can't blame me for my milk, Of course you can. So this is essentially what separates the two, and separates a private security officer or a bodyguard or a bouncer from a law enforcement officer, right? It's the assumption of responsibility. So that's some amazing stories. It's just I mean I've heard a lot about Monsanto's stories, like when Monsanto trucks would be Monsanto trucks, and then the wind blows like the seeds off of their trucks, and it it starts growing on another person's farm, and then Monsanto sues them for infringing on their copyright, something like that. And right, so many times that has happened and destroyed family farms that have been in business for decades, because even if they do win, that's still getting into massive amount of debt, just trying to prove yourself innocent. Right.
Well, and that's why our organization started is, farmers like Vernon, he would not have been able to defend himself.
Right.
And so when we take a case on behalf of a member, generally they end up paying nothing. We pick up the entire bill.
Wow.
But we're only able to do that because we're a membership organization. And we have thousands of members like you who all chip in $50 or $100 a year. And that makes us able to take these cases. And we also have attorneys who work at 1/5 the normal rate that they could be making elsewhere. And so we have very gracious attorneys who are committed to protecting small farmers. And we have members, hopefully like you and your listeners, who will join, who care deeply about, the fact that, this is what really gets my goat. This is what a few years ago we sued the FDA over their interstate ban on raw milk.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And in response to our lawsuit, the FDA said in writing, and I'll send you the link, but they said in writing that there is no fundamental right to choose what you eat and feed your family.
Really?
There is no fundamental right to choose the foods you want from who you want. There is no fundamental right to your own physical well-being and bodily health.
Wow.
And so the people who join our organization, they hear that and they chafe under it, and they want to see somebody stand up to the FDA and say, "Oh no, big guy, you're wrong."
Yeah.
And we're gonna go toe to toe with you at every turn. You know, we're gonna fight for every inch of ground on this issue.
Wow.
Because like for me, you know, there's certain lines in the sand, and one of them is what I eat.
Right.
Like I am going to choose what I eat. So, and who I get it from.
Yeah. Like one of the core concepts of voluntarism is self-ownership, and it's a very simple concept. You know, you own yourself and your actions, and you're responsible for whatever actions you take and the consequences that result. And most people accept that. Yeah, I own myself. Yeah, right. Okay. All right. So what if you want to do marijuana in your basement? Can you do that? What if you want to drink raw milk? Can you do that? You know, what if whatever, you know? And it gets muddled, you know. People invent all these little justifications for why you can't, you know. Oh, no, the marijuana, you know, it makes you a danger to society. Oh, no, raw dairy, maybe if you're sick, you can get somebody else sick, you're dangerous, whatever ridiculousness they can think of. But in the end, it's like, who owns you? If you don't own your own body, then who does? The politicians? The state owns you?
Yeah, well, and I, you know, like I'm a libertarian in my, you know, personally, politically, I'm libertarian. I'm just like, I have a hard enough time running my own life.
Exactly.
Like how would I ever get the credentials to run other people's lives? You know, J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings,
Right.
he was basically an anarchist.
Right.
The older he got, he has a great quote where he basically says, you know, like, you know, telling people how to live their lives is a job not one man in a million is fit for.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's just so, but even more so, when people try and use these risk arguments, like raw milk is risky.
Right.
Raw milk hasn't killed somebody in 30 years, whereas Bluebell pasteurized ice cream took out what, like half a dozen last summer?
Or how many times do they recall like thousands of pounds of beef for like you know, reported
47 million pound recall was issued in the past 2 weeks.
Oh, what was that?
A 47 million pound recall.
Is that like salmonella thing or a scare
I
or
forget
something?
what they found.
God.
You know, but this is the other part too. Like, you know, when it comes to food safety,
Yeah.
If our concern is truly safe food, because you know, I'm willing to contest and argue all facets of this subject.
Right.
And I just point out, like, in a local food system, you're never going to have a 47 million pound recall. You're never going to have a 4,700,000 pound recall. You're never going to have a 470,000 pound recall. You're never going to have a 47,000 pound recall.
Yeah.
You're never going to have a recall affecting 15 states over 6 months and 3,000 products. Because it's a system by nature that you know, it's inherently built on traceability, accountability, and transparency.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you get it's like with the beef from my farm. You know, I have a freezer full of beef under the side of our house here, and it's labeled not for sale. I know exactly where that cow came from before it came to my farm. I know exactly how that cow was raised on my farm. I know exactly what butcher that cow was butchered at when it left my farm. I went back to the butcher and picked it up myself. And that cow is not safe for me to sell a single package of meat to you from. But you can go to McDonald's and you can get a meat-like product on a bun that is the molecules of 1.3 million cows and other substances ground together.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's safe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, yeah, you're like you said, thousands of cows ground all together. And like, what if, some feces gets in there and it's ground all, how do you even how do you
Yeah, or
even like
what
keep
if they're
track of that?
toxic? Yeah,
Right.
well, and they can't, and so they basically, what kills me with consumers is consumers go to the grocery store and consumers basically trust shiny labels and government stamps
Hmm.
as if somehow pathogens care about either.
Right.
Well, and what Consumer Reports a number of years ago did a phenomenal study where they pulled chicken from grocery stores across the nation and tested it for pathogen contamination. So this is your FDA approved, USDA stamped and sealed, triple chlorine bathed, CAFO crap chicken. And
Chinese chicken.
well, not Chinese yet.
Oh, that's
soon,
not Chinese yet.
very
Okay.
soon.
Sorry.
And so so this is this is the mecca, the pinnacle of government food. And what Consumer Reports found was that 3/4 of the chicken samples tested positive for pathogenic bacteria. Pathogenic meaning bacteria that cause illness.
Yeah.
And half of those strains were antibiotic resistant.
Man.
And most of the chickens contained at a minimum 3 different strains.
Yeah.
And that chicken's been washed and sanitized and professionally packaged and multiple time government inspected, and it's in a government, it's lived in a government inspected facility its whole life. And for you and I, we'd say, if I, of course it's going to be sick. It's lived in a government inspected facility its whole life. Nothing can be healthy that lives under the thumb of the government its entire existence.
Right.
But consumers look at it, and consumers are like, this is safe, but unpasteurized milk from my neighbor's cow is like Russian roulette and gonna kill me. And it's baffling, the disconnect in the general public.
Yeah. So talking about government labels, can you go into a little bit of the the politics about the organic label and how that's changed over the years?
Ooh. So organic labeling. Well, organic labeling. One of my good friends who no longer lives in Kentucky, he actually worked inside of the National Organic Program, the NOP. So the National Organic Program is part of the USDA. And it was founded, I guess probably in the late 1990s, to regulate the burgeoning organic industry. Which I personally would say has been an utter disaster for the organic movement, because it basically led to it being industrialized and taken over by corporate interests who have no interest and no care about integrity farming.
Mm-hmm.
So originally when the National Organic Program was started, they built exceptions into the law because of the lack of organic inputs for some products and some types of farms. So these were provisions that were meant to be tightened over time as the industry grew, and a farmer could no longer say, I can't get X organically. I can't buy Y organically. Or for a company that's making breakfast cereal, it used to be like 80% of an item in a box had to be organic in order for it to be labeled certified organic. And over time, that was supposed to increase.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, what's happening in the National Organic Program is they're making the standards more and more lax.
Mm-hmm.
And less stringent, because most of what is now being grown organically in America is basically being grown by industrial organic mega farms that in practice and in other things often are not much different than the corporate owners, conventional businesses.
So I when I talk to a lot of people about factory farms and then begin to understand how harmful and dangerous those kind of operations are, and how the food itself is not to be trusted. So then they say, well, what should I do? So then I should eat all organic, and and I guess they see this. So there are only two choices, right? The factory farm or the organic. So what would you say to those people? What would be your recommendation?
Well, I get one or two items at a small local grocery store a week. You as a consumer have so many options to support actual local farmers. There's CSAs, there's farmers markets, there's buying clubs. For those in New York, there's like Nourishing Long Island and stuff. Like,
yeah, I know this.
There are so many ways to opt out of the government food system, and into a system that is voluntary, integrity-based, non-cruelty based, that there's no reason not to, other than some people just don't like the change, or they don't want to give up their Cheerios. So...
Right. Yeah. I love farmers markets. I go to them as often as I can, and that's one of the reasons I love over here. It's spring and summer and fall. It's so beautiful. Just not only meeting the farmers, and actually that's what I love. I love meeting the farmers, and I just ask them all kinds of questions, and they love what they do, and they have pride in their produce. And it's just a beautiful thing, to talk directly to the farmers. Like, how many people, when you go to, like Walmart or ShopRite or, King Cullen or a big chain like that, how many people can talk to the owners of the farms that they buy from,
Yeah. Well, and even worse, it's just like when you shop at those other places, the farmers get so little of what the farmer who raised that food gets less than 20 cents of your dollar.
Wow.
That's so, one thing that we're going to see how it plays out demographically, but farmers are a dying occupation. The average age of a farmer in America, I believe, is well above 60. And economically speaking, any industry whose average employee age is above 45 is considered an industry in decline. Once you get above, like the 50s for average age of employees, you're talking about an industry that is in, it's in demolition. And farmers, like most of my neighbors who farm, I mean, a lot of them, some of them were almost born in the previous century. A lot of my neighbors are so old, if they stand still in a forest, you can't tell them apart from a tree. And not a lot of people want to go into farming because, it is very hard physical work.
Yeah.
It is incredibly challenging work. We had passed through Kentucky this spring. 4 different times our farm was threatened by tornado or hail. If heavy hail or tornadoes had hit our farm, in 20 minutes, they would have done $10,000 to $20,000 worth of damage.
Right. Yeah.
It is, and I don't get to set my, and like for a lot of farmers, they don't get to set their prices.
Yeah.
And so you have just like, who wants to do this job? And unless average people decide that they want farmers to have freedom and they want farmers to still be there raising food for their children, they don't want their children merely drinking Solent Green. People have to continue to drive the change we're seeing. But for volunteerists and anarchists, it's a change towards the type of society we long for. One based around voluntary exchange, transparency, integrity. So instead of manipulation and coercion.
So you're saying that farming is slowly disappearing because of the age, not because of machines replacing the need for farmers.
Well, I mean, there's a huge need for farmers, and like, I might get in trouble saying this, but I'm on a show that, the people who hear it won't probably care. But if the way a person interacts with their land is through a very large machine, in my view, they're no longer a farmer. They're a heavy equipment operator who owns land. Like, to actually farm, and you'll notice that, and this isn't to say that, like Joel Salatin uses a tractor. I on occasion rent a skid steer or borrow a tractor. But most of my interaction with the ecosystem that is my farm is done on my feet or on my knees.
Wow.
And again, I'm not saying that there's not a place for technology in farming. And there's some technologies coming out that are fascinating in how they might help small farmers. But at the end of the day, the real thing that makes a farmer is an actual understanding of how ecology and ecosystems work in a meaningful way, and expending energy to steward and tame those and bring beauty and harmony out of the excesses and challenges that nature creates apart from that. And you don't do that from a tractor.
Right.
All you do from a tractor is apply chemicals multiple times a year and then cut, pseudo food crops. You don't really farm that way.
So what would you say the difference is between the way you farm and the way Joel Salatin farms, apart from the that machinery?
Oh, well, I mean, Joel, the big difference is I wish I was as great a farmer as Joel.
Oh, okay.
I wish I had like a quarter of the knowledge he has. Oh gosh. I want your listeners to understand though, small farms can vary greatly in terms of methodology, design, mix of products and animals on their farm, and still all be ecologically faithful. Or, they can just be growing. When we started our farm, I could not get non-genetically modified animal feed in the state of Kentucky. I had to go 8 hours or something to get animal feed, which was not fiscally viable. I would have had to have charged $20 a dozen for my eggs. And so you also need to, you need to watch out for farmers who are merely being lazy. But at the same time, I meet city people who are so ignorant of what farming is actually like. I want a chicken that eats only bugs. And I'm like, well, I can't guarantee you that your chicken will eat only bugs. So you will need to find another farmer. I want a cow that has never eaten a single seed or grain. I was like, but my pasture is full of seeds and grains and other things. And my cows eat those as they eat the grass. Right. Sometimes consumers come to farmers with ill-informed standards that farmers cannot meet. And so, our farm is, especially, Joel has 400 acres and he has a multi-generation head start. And his farm is one of the most glorious things you'll ever see. If you and your listeners are free in August, the weekend of August 19th and 20th, he sets aside that Saturday as a fundraiser for our organization and does a tour.
Oh, wow.
And it's a food freedom weekend,
Wow.
down in Staunton, Virginia. You can buy tickets on our website. Polyface donates all this stuff to make it a fundraiser for us. But come on down, see me in person. A ton of the people who are there are, freedom-oriented, libertarian, crazy people, including Joel. And we'll have a great time talking about these things in person. But our farm, we're only 35 acres. We've only been here 6 years.
Okay.
And so, our farm, especially because our kids are so young and we're still building infrastructure, is a work in progress. And I, Joel leans heavily towards animal agriculture, where I'm leaning in the direction of permaculture and especially food forests. And similar approaches, silvopasture, food forest types approaches to building out our farm.
Wow. Have you heard of the book called Cure Tooth Decay?
Yeah, by Rami Nagel.
Rami Nagel, yeah. Awesome, because that book is what really got me into raw dairy and educated me about that, and was it fermented fish oil and bone broth soup and bone marrow and organ meats and that kind of stuff, and actually I started writing for Rami Nagel for a little bit, and that was fun for his website. But it was really cool. So that's how I got into raw dairy, and I started getting it and the kefir and all that, and eating that. And so it's really, really interesting and fascinating how, it's kind of like the book of that Joel Salatin wrote, which is Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. Oh, that is nice. See that? Which I did not read, but it's an awesome title, and I probably should read it.
I almost can't read it because it's like people always ask me if I've seen the latest food documentary. And I say no, and they're like, why? I was like, I know too much. like there is going deeper down the rabbit hole only leads me to bad places. Like I got to work on solutions.
Right. Exactly.
So
Then talking about food. Yeah. So some of the things that got me into, so before getting into volunteerism, I was into nutrition and juicing and alternative cancer therapies, and learning about all that stuff in high school, outside of school, of course. and then and that's why I studied acupuncture and Chinese herbs and Eastern nutrition. Because of that, it kind of led me into that, and Monsanto, and then and it's fascinating to read because at that time I was reading a lot of these websites that were advocating for banning GMOs, right? And at that time, it kind of sounded like a good idea. Like, yeah, I guess that's a good idea, banning GMOs. And then later, learning about volunteerism and what the state is and how prohibition works, and how it doesn't work.
Yeah.
More accurately put. So go ahead.
I think the problem with GMOs, though, from a libertarian framework, is they are an inherent, fundamental violation of private property rights. So imagine you and I both have car painting businesses that are side by side. We both repaint cars. If I repainted a car in a way where paint blew off of my business lot onto cars you had painted, you'd be able to sue me.
Yeah.
There'd be, there is no other place in the world other than when it comes to industrial agriculture. If I find glyphosate in my rainwater or well water, I can't sue for trespass. I can't sue for the contamination. If I go check my corn in a few weeks and it has Franken DNA from a Monsanto corn crop down the road, I can't get compensated for the contamination, even though it's an economic loss and a violation of my property rights.
Hmm.
And so, I'm not a big fan of banning GMOs. Partly GMOs only came into existence because of the massive government subsidies
Yeah.
that were thrown behind them.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like for libertarians or even conservative people who fundamentally believe in private property rights, let's be clear that these chemicals that are used in these agricultural methods and the genetic information that is being introduced into the environment, they have no way to control and with respect to other people's private property. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely see that point, and and I think somebody asked me about that too, like with like genetically modified fish, let's say salmon, right? That are, I guess, for the most part, grown in a farm, but then they say, well, what if that fish gets released into the wild, right, and mates, and then it produces this and just slowly just contaminates the entire ocean? What happens then? Well, I mean, the way I look at it is if you combine like a gene from a tomato and you put it into a fish to get some kind of characteristic that you want, to me, it doesn't seem like that will yield a species that will be able to propagate. It's like, for me, it's like when you combine what is it, a horse and a mule, then you get a donkey. Is that?
Yeah.
Right?
Or a horse and a donkey, you get
right,
a mule.
yeah, I always get that mixed up. And basically, the reason that that's not a problem is because that's an evolutionary cul-de-sac. It doesn't lead anywhere, right? Because it's sterile.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the way I'm thinking about GMOs now. It's like, sure, like you said, it can contaminate, but it won't go so far because, like, it can't. It's not, it's not viable as an organism. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the problem is genetic contamination has been shown to be fairly persistent. So it's like now with some areas, yes, it seems unlikely that the genetic contamination would have legs.
Yeah.
Because things are because things are the way they are. But there's other areas where the genetic contamination, it's something like sugar beets. Mm-hmm. Sugar beets and corn in America, even a lot of organic corn shows traces of genetic contamination from genetically modified corn. Mm-hmm. So some of the genetic information seems to be rather durable. And then it would be interesting to see over time, farmers are starting to plant less and less genetically modified crops in response to consumer concern and demand. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see if genetically modified crops are dramatically scaled back in the next 20 years, if some of that contamination passes away. At the same time, though, it's not just genetic contamination. A lot of the pesticides and herbicides they use have half-lives of 5 or more years. And so these are persistent in my family's well water. My great-great-grandchildren may still be getting exposure in the well water, sadly. Somebody did a study, and they basically showed that glyphosate is so prevalent in the environment that samples of rainwater from across the entire world test positive.
Really? Wow.
Because these they're everywhere. Like you go up to the Arctic. It's so sad. Like think of the Eskimos and some other people groups who live in like the high Arctic, and they test some of the worst in the world for certain chemical contaminants.
Wow.
Even though they live in huts of ice. Like they're not getting chemical. Like their exposure is coming from a system that cares not for property rights. It cares not where the final chemical compounds end up. as long as it cheaply, quickly does the job along the way for them, and they can avoid any downstream responsibility.
Yeah. Recently, Stefan Molyneux did a video, an interview with a guy who wrote a book, saying basically how GMOs help humanity and help to feed, poor countries and starving countries, and help, it's a new wave of food and the new next food technology, and it's interesting because the way I look at it, if GMOs are really the next level of food and it's more efficient and would feed more people and it's more nutritious, why does it need to be propped up by the state? Right? Because the only things that need to be propped up by the state are economically inefficient things that cannot survive on their own because they're not profitable, because they don't help people. The only things, if a company like Monsanto needs to bury its what do you call that? The immunity in the farm, what was it, some farmer bill
they can't be sued.
Right, for GMOs. Like if it doesn't hurt people, then why are you seeking immunity from the state? From being from harming your consumers.
Yeah, well, and to take up that issue of this came up years ago. I debated basically a low-level GMO rep in a debate about the importance and history and dangers of GMOs. And one thing I brought up in the debate that my opponent conceded was historically correct. If you look at agricultural yields since the 1940s, and you look at nations that adopted genetically modified technology versus nations like Russia that did not, nations that adopted genetically modified technology experienced no additional yield gains on a per acre basis compared to other nations that did not. What drove the increases in agricultural gains was not GMO technology. It was a host of other technological improvements, heavy machinery improvements, mechanization, chemical fertilizers, it was a host of other factors that regardless of whether or not you did GMO, you got the same kind of gains productivity wise. And from a liberty standpoint, though, what the government wanted a lot of these gains because it allowed it to bully people through the bag of grain. And these gains came at a high cost. Again, if you read Ra Patel's Stuffed and Starved, he chronicles the Green Revolution in India, and basically how now in India you have children dying on the side of on the side of a wall, and on the other side of that wall is a warehouse, a 5 football fields long, full of rotting grain.
Wow.
India was one of the biggest candidates for the Green Revolution, yet it still has rampant, massive malnourishment in spite of it, because GMO technology does not help feed people.
Right.
Most genetically modified grains are fed to animals that are then sold to rich Western countries. And all of that grain growing displaces indigenous, affordable agricultural systems that could actually feed those people. So the idea that GMOs and industrial agriculture, we need it to feed the world, we need it or we're all going to starve to death. Anybody who doubts that, I invite down to Kentucky. You can spend 2 days with me. If we starve to death as a species, it will only be because of our stupidity. It has nothing to do with the rejection or acceptance of really poorly thought out and implemented technologies.
That kind of reminds me of like the broken window fallacy applied to agriculture. in that people, when I say, well, because people point at like, look at police officers, look at the USPS postal workers, look at school teachers, see all these people having jobs. Isn't that wonderful? We're having job creation, and that's the scene. But what you don't see is the massive amount of private jobs that are created out of true demand that are annihilated because of the force that was necessary to create those government jobs. And the same thing with agriculture, right? Like you said,
Yeah. Well, I mean, with agriculture, sad because there would be millions of more agricultural jobs in America if farmers were not at the mercy of their cartels to set prices.
Mm-hmm.
Food in America should be 2 to 3 times more expensive than it is. But by almost any metric you use. And so food prices in America are artificially low, though we pay a high price in terms of human disease.
Mm-hmm.
We pay a high price in terms of more and more government debt and other things. But a lot of food prices in America, compared to what, for most of human history, people have spent at a minimum 30% of their gross income on food.
Yeah.
30 to 60% is the general historical range of what people spend on food. And Americans spend 8%.
Yeah. Can you go into a little bit of the discrepancy of like you can buy like a a McDonald's Happy Meal or a value meal for like, I don't know, a couple of dollars, and then you want to buy like broccoli or any kind of produce, and you're spending like almost $10 for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so this is great. Let's look at a value meal, and let's look at a meal from my farm. So you look at a value meal, you're probably getting 20 to 30 different pesticides and herbicides and extenders and fillers in the food. A lot of those extenders and fillers are derived or made from corn, soy, and wheat, which receive almost all of the government subsidies in the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill doesn't subsidize apples. It doesn't subsidize broccoli. It doesn't subsidize lettuce. It gives billions of dollars to soy, corn, wheat, grain growers. So the cows in that, the meat, I hate to use the word meat, I think they did some genetic testing on a McDonald's hamburger, and they could find almost no genetic evidence that a cow was in there. Because the hamburger, it's literally a bunch of fillers. Right. It's a bunch of highly processed fillers that are only cheap because of the Farm Bill, right, and because of our endless meddling in the Middle East to control the price of oil. There's a beautiful article you can Google. It's called "Following the Food Chain Back to Iraq." The oil we eat, following the food chain back to Iraq. And this author basically points out that, like in Iowa alone, every summer we use the equivalent of like multiple Hiroshima nuclear bombs of energy growing, border to border corn in these states. And that's only possible because of government subsidies and foreign policy. If oil was not artificially cheap, you wouldn't be able to do this, because you wouldn't be able to turn the oil into all these things that there's farmer, like just all this craziness. So then we look, all of the processing of that hamburger, that cow and all the other things that got mixed in with that cow got mixed with thousands of other cows. and it's all mixed and processed together. So McDonald's probably has their processing cost for beef down below 25 cents a pound.
Wow.
Whereas for me to get a beef processed, my cost is over $2 to $3 a pound.
Man.
Well, and it's not, and it's partly because the way the USDA meat inspection system works is the butchers I take my animal to are actually inspected. Whereas the butchering facilities McDonald's gets their animals from are not inspected. You know, like our one local USDA inspected butchering house, they might be able to butcher, let's say, 10 cows in a given day. And they have one USDA inspector to inspect all 10 of those cows and just totally ride their ass the entire day. And that's exactly what the inspector does. We could do a whole episode on USDA harassment of small businesses in the food industry, whereas at a mega butcher, they're butchering 1,000 cows per hour with one inspector. How many of those cows is the inspector looking at?
Right. 1,000.
But see, I have to be inspected like him if I want to sell you a pound of meat.
Yeah.
And so just at every turn, you know, the government subsidizes pseudo food and it punishes me. You know, here in Kentucky, if I want to sell you a head of lettuce at the farmer's market, last I checked, the farmer's market manual was like 80 to 150 pages
Wow.
to sell a head of lettuce.
Oh, shoot.
And then I have to have farm insurance. And then I might have to have farm licenses if I'm doing, you know, like it's just everything, all of the costs, the entire regulatory system means that I am pinched and pressed and oppressed at every turn, while my competitors are, you know, what's the word? Propped up.
Right.
With my own tax money, no less.
Right.
You know, so we all pay taxes, and it goes to these people who are then, you know, and that's the worst of it is to know like a portion of the money I pay in taxes goes to the people who are growing these grains that then goes to make cows 1/5 the price that I could ever raise them in the way they've been raised since the first cow ever hit the ground.
Wow. Yeah, we should definitely. I definitely want to have you back on. I think you know, we could talk about you know, your 4 kids, and fifth one's on the way, and your experiences with that and home birth, and because I think we have a lot of great stories to tell about that. But maybe we'll save that for next time. Give some people some anticipation for that. But really appreciate you coming on, John. I don't want you to keep you too long. So please, before we go, tell people how they can reach you if they want to follow your work.
Great. Well, again, we have a website, farmtoconsumer.org. We're a membership organization. We don't get grants from the government. It's not like they're going to pay us to fight them. So if you find it appalling that the USDA and FDA are willing to say in writing you have no fundamental right to choose what you feed your family, I encourage you to come and partner with us and help me and help our organization continue to say to them that there are people in this nation who don't agree with that sentiment. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook at John Moody. I'll be speaking, if I'm up for it, I'll be speaking at Paleo FX this weekend down in Austin, Texas, hopefully. In a couple months again, we'll be having a very, you know, volunteerist, libertarian get-together in Virginia about these issues. We want to invite people to. You can find out details on our website soon. And then hopefully I'll just be back on the show at your convenience, friend, and when it's good for you.
Yeah, definitely. So before we go, I just want to ask you, are you familiar with Gary Null's work?
Gary Knowles.
Gary, no,
Is he a farmer?
No, he's a. I guess you say he's a food activist. He writes on many books, very prolific. Right, he has a lot of books. He's an award-winning documentary maker. A bunch on GMOs, bunch on vaccines, and one recently that you kind of reminded me of, which is called the FDA, the cult of. I think it's the War on Health and the Cult of Tyranny. So and I guess it's approaching the FDA from the medicine perspective, as opposed to the food. But yeah, because that's what he focuses on mainly is alternative medicine, holistic medicine. He's wrote a bunch of books on that, and I've learned a lot from him, his documentaries as well as his books. So yeah, really, really awesome individual.
I think I have read some of his articles and seen some clips and other stuff by him. But I haven't interacted with him extensively. So I'll tomorrow or the next day see what I can dig up.
Yeah. There's the Vaccination is one that that's a documentary. And another documentary what's it called? Autism Made in the USA. And then he made one on GMOs. I forget what's Seeds of Death, something like that.
Seeds of Deception.
Maybe that's when it. Yeah. Maybe
I have that documentary again. Like it's so hard for me at this point because I know firsthand in my day-to-day work how corrupt the government is.
You don't need to be taught it anymore.
Well, and I just at times that it's not so much I'm sticking my hands in my ears to ignore it.
Yeah.
But it's just because I can't hear anymore at the moment.
I understand. Definitely.
It can be overwhelming to realize just how screwed up things have gotten.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. In the beginning I was learning about, you learn about all the problems, how everything is corrupt and perverse and messed up, and then finally I'm like, all right, I understand. Now let's make the world a better place, raise our kids well, help to give people good quality food, and I'm making this podcast, helping to show people how people are improving the world through their various means, either through writing, blogging, being author, rapping, and you doing it through this consumer this website. So really, really appreciate you coming on the show. Really had a wonderful conversation. So if anyone wants to help me out, you can do so through Bitcoin, Patreon, patreon.com/Seeds of Liberty. You can also help me out by using the affiliate links on each of the on my website under the post. I'm going to have various books related to this conversation, and if you click on those, you can buy those things through Amazon, and I will get a commission at no extra cost to you. So please help me do what I love doing best, which is interviewing fascinating people like John here. And so as we understand in economics, there's opportunity cost to everything, right? Nothing is free. If we're doing this, we're not doing something else, right? So that's and we respond to incentives, right? Monetary incentives are always appreciated. But I make these and I put them out there for free because I want the world to be a more knowledgeable place, right? So John, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and theseedsofliberty.com and theconsciousresistance.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
Great. Good night, friend.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up in any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.